The security officers dragged him off the plane like a common criminal, but when he walked back into that boardroom the next morning, he wasn't there to apologize. He was there to pull $4 billion in funding. The man in seat 12B didn't look like trouble. Benjamin Harris sat quietly, hands folded on his lap, wearing a simple navy polo shirt and khaki pants that had seen better days. His sneakers were scuffed, his watch was plastic, and the small duffel bag shoved under the seat in front of him looked like it came from a discount store. Everything about him screamed economy class passenger who somehow ended up in the wrong section. But Benjamin wasn't lost. He was exactly where he needed to be. The flight from Chicago to Denver was packed, the kind of Tuesday afternoon rush where business travelers mixed with families heading home. Benjamin had boarded with Group C, found his assigned seat and coach, then quietly moved forward when no one was looking. Seat 12B in first class was supposed to be empty according to the manifest he'd memorized. What he hadn't counted on was the flight attendant with the sharp eyes and the badge that read Senior Crew Member Rachel Torres. Rachel had been working for Skyline Airlines for 12 years, long enough to spot someone who didn't belong. She noticed everything. The way Benjamin's shirt was impressed, how he didn't have the confident stride of someone used to first-class service, the fact that he ordered water instead of the complimentary champagne. Red flags everywhere. "Excuse me, sir," Rachel said, appearing beside his seat with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Benjamin looked up, his expression calm. "Of course." He reached into his pocket and handed her a crumpled piece of paper. Rachel scanned it quickly. Seat 34F, Economy. Her smile turned arctic. "Sir, you're in the wrong section. Your seat is toward the back of the aircraft." "I understand," Benjamin said quietly, "but this seat appears to be empty. I was hoping—" "That's not how it works." Rachel's voice carried just enough volume to make nearby passengers glance over. "First-class passengers pay for the privilege. You'll need to return to your assigned seat immediately." Benjamin nodded slowly, started to stand, then hesitated. "Could I possibly upgrade? I'd be happy to pay the difference." Rachel's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Sir, the upgrade fee would be $800, cash or credit." She said it like she was daring him to admit he couldn't afford it. Benjamin reached for his wallet, a worn leather thing that looked older than some of the passengers. Rachel's expression shifted from annoyance to barely concealed disdain as she watched him fumble through what appeared to be a few crumpled bills. "Actually," Benjamin said, closing the wallet, "I think I'll just head back to my seat." "Good choice," Rachel said, stepping aside with exaggerated courtesy. But as Benjamin gathered his bag, she couldn't resist one final jab. "Next time, maybe book the seat you can actually afford." The words hung in the air like smoke. A businessman across the aisle smirked into his newspaper. An elderly woman in pearls shook her head disapprovingly. Benjamin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. He simply walked toward the back of the plane, head down, while 30 pairs of eyes watched his retreat. What none of them knew was that Benjamin Harris had grown up in a trailer park outside Detroit, sleeping on a couch that doubled as his bed while his mother worked 3 jobs to keep the lights on. He remembered wearing the same pair of jeans to school for 2 weeks straight because they were the only ones without holes. He remembered the way teachers looked at him when he couldn't afford the field trip fees, the way other parents steered their children away from the kid with the free lunch vouchers. Those memories had shaped him into the man who now controlled a private equity firm worth $12 billion. The same man who had spent the last 6 months quietly acquiring a controlling interest in Skyline Airlines. The same man who was traveling incognito to conduct what his board called ground truth research before finalizing the largest funding package in the airline's history. Benjamin found his assigned seat between a crying baby and a man whose cologne could probably be smelled from the cockpit. The seat was narrow, the legroom non-existent, and the air conditioning seemed to have forgotten this section of the plane existed. He squeezed into the middle seat, pulled out his phone, and opened the Notes app where he'd been documenting his experience. Flight attendant Rachel Torres, refused upgrade request, made assumptions based on appearance, public humiliation tactics employed. He paused, then added, "Recommend immediate review of customer service protocols." As the plane prepared for takeoff, Benjamin closed his eyes and thought about the boardroom presentation he'd be giving in less than 24 hours. Skyline Airlines was hemorrhaging money, their stock price in free fall, their reputation in tatters after a series of public relations disasters. His firm had been their last hope, the white knight investor willing to inject $4 billion to save them from bankruptcy. Had been willing. The flight was smooth until they hit turbulence over Kansas. Nothing serious, just enough to make the plane shudder and the seatbelt lights flicker on. Benjamin was dozing when he felt a sharp elbow in his ribs. The man beside him, red-faced and reeking of whiskey, was leaning across him to get the flight attendant's attention. "Hey," he slurred, "this guy's been bothering me the whole flight." Benjamin's eyes snapped open. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me," the drunk man continued, his voice rising. "Kept bumping into me, taking up my space. I want him moved." Rachel Torres appeared as if summoned, her expression already set in judgment mode. She looked at Benjamin like he was a problem she'd been expecting to deal with all along. "Sir, have you been disturbing other passengers?" she asked. "No," Benjamin said simply. "I've been sleeping." "He's lying," the drunk man insisted. "And he stinks. Probably hasn't showered in days." Benjamin felt the familiar burn of humiliation in his chest, the same feeling he'd carried from childhood. Around them, passengers were turning to stare, phones coming out to record the drama. The businessman from first class had actually gotten up to get a better view, grinning like he was watching entertainment. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me," Rachel said to Benjamin. "Where?" "We're going to sort this out at the front of the aircraft." Benjamin stood slowly, his face burning with embarrassment as every passenger in economy watched him walk the aisle of shame toward first class. Rachel led him to the galley area where two other flight attendants were waiting with crossed arms and suspicious expressions. "We've had multiple complaints about your behavior." "Multiple?" Benjamin asked. "From who?" Rachel glanced back toward the drunk man who was now passed out in his seat. "That's confidential." "I see." Benjamin's voice was steady, but his hands were trembling slightly. "And what exactly am I accused of?" "Disruptive behavior, body odor, attempting to sit in seats you haven't paid for." Rachel ticked off the charges like a prosecutor. "We have the right to remove passengers who make others uncomfortable." "Remove me?" Benjamin felt something cold settle in his stomach. "From the flight?" "The captain has been notified. We'll be making an emergency landing in Denver in 30 minutes, and security will escort you off the aircraft." The galley fell silent except for the hum of the engines. Benjamin looked at the three flight attendants, saw the certainty in their eyes, the satisfaction of a problem being solved. He thought about revealing who he was, pulling out his phone to show them his corporate credentials, watching their faces change from smugness to terror. Instead, he simply nodded. "I understand," he said quietly. What Benjamin understood was that this moment was worth more than $4 billion. This was the proof he'd been looking for, the smoking gun that would justify every decision he was about to make. These people had shown him exactly who they were when they thought it didn't matter. The plane touched down in Denver 45 minutes later. As promised, two airport security officers boarded before any passengers were allowed to disembark. They walked straight to Benjamin's seat, their presence causing a ripple of excited whispers through the cabin. "Sir, we need you to come with us," one of the officers said, not unkindly, but with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Benjamin gathered his duffel bag and followed them off the plane. Behind him, I could hear passengers speculating about what he'd done, phones recording his exit, Rachel Torres explaining to anyone who would listen about the disruptive passenger they'd removed for everyone's safety. The security office at Denver International Airport was exactly what Benjamin expected. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, the smell of industrial disinfectant and stale coffee. The officers were professional but firm, asking for identification, taking statements, filling out forms that would become part of an official incident report. "The flight crew says you were intoxicated and bothering other passengers," Officer Martinez said, reading from his notes. "I wasn't intoxicated. I had nothing to drink except water." "They also report that you attempted to sit in first class without paying." "That's true. I asked about upgrading and was told it would cost $800. When I couldn't pay immediately, I returned to my assigned seat. Officer Martinez looked up from his notepad. You're seeming pretty calm for someone who just got kicked off a plane. Benjamin shrugged. Getting angry won't change anything. What he didn't say was that he was angrier than he'd been in years. Not at the officers, who were just doing their jobs, but at the system that had allowed this to happen. At the flight attendants who had judged him based on his clothes and his wallet. At the passengers who had filmed his humiliation like it was entertainment. At the airline that had trained its employees to treat customers like enemies. After 2 hours of paperwork and questioning, Benjamin was released with a warning and a recommendation that he contact the airline to resolve any disputes about his treatment. He walked through the terminal, found a quiet corner near a window overlooking the runways, and pulled out his phone. The first call was to his assistant. Cancel the Skyline meeting tomorrow, he said without preamble. Sir, the $4 billion funding package? They're expecting... Cancel it. Should I reschedule? Benjamin watched a Skyline Airlines plane taxi toward a gate, its blue and silver logo gleaming in the afternoon sun. No, we're done with Skyline. The second call was to his legal team. I need you to prepare a formal statement of intent, he said. We're withdrawing our offer to fund Skyline Airlines effective immediately. Benjamin, what happened? Yesterday you were ready to sign the deal for $4 billion. Yesterday I thought they were a company worth saving. Today I learned they're exactly the kind of company that deserves to fail. The third call was to Marcus Chen, Skyline CEO, a man who had been kissing up to Benjamin for months, desperate for the funding that would save his company. Marcus, said Benjamin when the call connected, I'm calling to inform you that Harrison Capital is withdrawing our funding offer. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. Benjamin? Is this some kind of joke? We have the signing ceremony tomorrow morning. Had, past tense. What the hell happened? 24 hours ago, you were ready to write us a check for $4 billion. Benjamin looked out the window again, watched another Skyline plane push back from its gate. Your employees happened, Marcus. Your culture happened. Your complete inability to treat human beings with basic dignity happened. I don't understand. I flew on one of your planes today, coach class under my real name. Your flight attendants treated me like garbage because I didn't look wealthy enough for your standards. They had me removed from the aircraft for asking about an upgrade. Marcus's voice became frantic. Benjamin, please, we can fix this. Whatever happened, we can make it right. Fire whoever was involved, implement new training, anything you want. It's too late for that. You can't pull $4 billion because of one bad flight attendant. Benjamin's voice hardened. I can, and I am. You want to know why? Because that flight attendant represents your company's values. She wasn't some rogue employee having a bad day. She was following the culture you've created, the attitude you've allowed to flourish. When she looked at me, she saw someone she could treat badly without consequences. And you know what? She was right. There would have been no consequences if I actually was the person she thought I was. We'll launch a full investigation. Don't bother. I got everything I need to know about Skyline Airlines from 30,000 feet. Your company doesn't deserve to survive. Benjamin ended the call and sat back in the uncomfortable airport chair. His phone immediately started buzzing with callbacks from Marcus, text messages from other Skyline executives, emails from board members who had somehow already heard the news. He ignored them all. Instead, he opened his laptop and began typing a letter that would be on the desk of every major financial publication by morning. The subject line read, Why Harrison Capital Withdrew $4 billion from Skyline Airlines. He wrote about growing up poor, about understanding what it felt like to be judged by your appearance, about the importance of treating every customer with dignity, regardless of their perceived wealth. He wrote about corporate culture and systemic discrimination and the responsibility that came with accepting investment dollars. But mostly, he wrote about Seat 12B and a flight attendant named Rachel Torres, who had no idea that her cruelty would cost her company its future. The letter went viral within hours. Financial news networks picked it up first, then mainstream media, then social media, where it was shared hundreds of thousands of times. The hashtag Seat12B began trending as people shared their own stories of being mistreated by airline employees, of being judged by their appearance, of watching companies prioritize profits over basic human decency. Skyline's stock price, already precarious, went into freefall. By market close the next day, they had lost 30% of their remaining value. 3 other potential investors pulled out within the week, spooked by the public relations nightmare and the questions being raised about the company's culture. Rachel Torres was fired, of course. So was her supervisor and the crew chief who had signed off on Benjamin's removal. The airline issued a formal apology, implemented new sensitivity training, and offered Benjamin a lifetime of free first-class flights. Too little, too late. 6 months later, Skyline Airlines filed for bankruptcy. Their assets were sold off to competitors, their routes redistributed, their employees scattered to other carriers or unemployment lines. The company that had been flying passengers for 47 years was gone. Killed not by market forces or natural disasters, but by a single act of cruelty in Seat 12B. Benjamin never flew commercial again. He bought his own plane, hired his own crew, and made sure that everyone who worked for him understood that how you treat people when you think it doesn't matter is actually when it matters most. Sometimes late at night in his office, he would think about that flight, about the drunk man who had lied about him, about the passengers who had filmed his humiliation like it was entertainment, about the airline that would never recover from their solo flight in Seat 12B. He didn't feel guilty about what he had done to Skyline. A company that would allow an employee to treat a customer that way didn't deserve to exist. But he did feel something else, something harder to name. Relief, maybe, that he had the power to make sure it never happened again. Or satisfaction, that the little boy who had been judged for his secondhand clothes and free lunch vouchers had grown up to become someone who could hold the judges accountable. Or maybe it was just the cold comfort of justice served at 30,000 feet. The business world called it the most expensive customer service failure in corporate history. Benjamin called it a lesson in what happens when you forget that every person you meet might be the most important person you'll ever meet. The plane ticket for that flight from Chicago to Denver cost him $237. The lesson it taught him was worth exactly $4 billion more. And somewhere in Denver, in a quiet suburb where she now worked at a small regional airline, Rachel Torres would wake up some mornings and remember the quiet man in Seat 12B who had asked politely for an upgrade and been treated like he was invisible. She would remember, and she would wonder if things might have been different if she had simply said yes. But wondering doesn't change the past, and some mistakes cost more than money. They cost everything.